The sound of the slap echoed through the quiet cafe like a gunshot shattering glass. Thomas Martinez stood perfectly still, his left cheek burning crimson
That's
where the
good
drunk
coffee.
palm had
Glad you're
connected
enjoying
with
it.
brutal force.
You think
His
you can
hand
just
remained
walk away?
wrapped around a cup
Get
of
your
cold
hands off
coffee
me!
that had
Please
long
stop.
since
This
stopped
isn't healthy.
Stay out of this!
He did not flinch. He did not step backward. He did not raise his voice or ball his fists in retaliation. He simply absorbed the blow like it was nothing more than a gust of autumn wind passing through an open window. His dark eyes locked onto the man who had struck him with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing of what churned beneath the surface. The drunk who had delivered the slap laughed loudly, turning to his two companions with the swagger of someone who had never faced genuine consequences in his entire privileged life. "Mind your own business, loser. We're just having some fun with the lady." Amanda Clark sat frozen at her corner table. Her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs, but she was not staring at Thomas because he had just been publicly humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. She was staring because of the way he held himself in the aftermath of that blow. Calm, centered, completely controlled. There was something coiled beneath that stillness, something waiting patiently for release, something genuinely dangerous that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with capability. She had spent 2 years and a considerable fortune searching for this man across 3 continents, and in the span of a single slap, she had finally found him. The drunk took another step toward her table, emboldened by his friend's silence. His two companions began to position themselves strategically, one drifting left, while the other moved to partially block the exit. Whether by practiced instinct or deliberate intent, Amanda could not determine with certainty. "Hey there, beautiful." Sitting all alone on a gorgeous Saturday afternoon. That's practically a crime in a friendly little town like ours. Amanda kept her voice deliberately flat and cold as winter steel. "I am not interested in company. Come on now. Just have one little drink with us. We'll show you what real Ridgewood hospitality looks like." He smiled as if he were generously offering her a tremendous favor she should gratefully accept without hesitation. The second man pulled out a chair and dropped heavily into it beside her, without asking permission or waiting for consent, his knee pressing against hers beneath the table with obvious, deliberate intent that made her skin crawl. The third had completed his casual drift and now stood positioned between her and the door, not quite blocking the exit entirely, but making the underlying message abundantly clear to anyone paying attention. "I said no. Back off now." She did not bother to mask the cold steel in her voice this time. The leader's smile widened into something thoroughly unpleasant that had nothing to do with friendliness. Feisty. I really like that quality in a woman. He reached toward her shoulder with a meaty hand. She said no. The voice came from behind them from the direction of the bar. Quiet calm, carrying the absolute finality of a heavy door closing forever with no possibility of reopening. Thomas had risen from his stool without making a sound that anyone had noticed. He stood perhaps 8 feet away, hands loose and relaxed at his sides, his posture apparently casual and completely unthreatening to the untrained eye. Nothing whatsoever about his appearance suggested any kind of danger. He looked exactly like what his worn clothes clearly advertised to the world, a nobody, a small-town mechanic who worked with his hands. Someone who had clearly made the poor decision to involve himself in matters that did not concern him in the slightest. The drunk leader turned with exaggerated slowness, looked Thomas up and down with theatrical disdain and contempt, and laughed dismissively. "Who the hell are you supposed to be? Her boyfriend or something? Just someone who heard her say no twice now." "Yeah. Well, here's some free advice for you, buddy. Mind your own goddamn business before you get hurt. This is my business. Everyone in this cafe is my business." The drunk stepped away from Amanda's table and approached Thomas until they stood less than 2 feet apart, close enough for their breath to mingle in the space between them. He puffed his chest and set his jaw in the universal posture of a man who had won countless bar fights through sheer intimidation alone, who had learned through repeated experience that most ordinary people backed down immediately when confronted with physical size and open aggression. "You want to play hero tonight? Fine hero. Let me show you what heroes actually get." He swung his open palm across Thomas's face with all the force his alcohol-impaired coordination could muster. The slap connected with a crack that silenced every other sound in the room instantly. Thomas did not move. His cheek flushed bright red where the blow had landed with considerable force, but his dark eyes never left the drunk's face, and something in that steady, unwavering gaze made the temperature in the cafe seem to drop by several degrees. "That's exactly what heroes get. Now sit back down before I really—" He never finished the sentence. Thomas moved, not with the flashy cinematic speed of action movies, but with something far more unsettling, a brutal efficiency that wasted nothing, that transformed violence into simple, inevitable physics governed by laws older than civilization itself. In the first second, he captured the drunk's extended wrist in an iron grip, twisted it against the joint in a direction wrists were definitely not designed to bend, and used the resulting leverage to slam the man face first onto the nearest table with tremendous force. The impact rattled every dish in the cafe and sent a coffee cup rolling across the floor. In the second, the drunk's friend launched himself forward from the chair beside Amanda. Thomas sidestepped the clumsy charging attack, hooked the man's own momentum like a weapon against him, and redirected it into a throw that deposited him flat on his back on the hardwood floor with a thud that shook the windows in their frames. In the third second, the remaining drunk produced a folding knife from somewhere inside his jacket, the blade clicking open with a sound that drew gasps from scattered corners of the room. Thomas did not hesitate for even a fraction of a moment. He closed the distance before the knife could rise into a threatening position, delivered a precise kick to the man's wrist that sent the weapon spinning away harmlessly across the floor, captured the arm in a controlling grip, torqued it behind the man's back with practiced precision that spoke of thousands of hours of training, and drove him firmly to his knees on the worn wooden planks. 3 men, 3 seconds, no blood spilled, no furniture broken, no shouting or cursing or chaos. Just 3 bodies either prone on the floor or kneeling in complete submission, entirely unable to move or offer any resistance whatsoever. Thomas straightened his flannel shirt and rolled his shoulders as if loosening a minor kink from sitting too long. Nothing more significant than that. "Sharon," he said calmly, turning toward the bar with casual ease, "would you mind calling Sheriff Harris?" The cafe owner nodded, already reaching for the phone mounted on the wall behind the counter. Her expression suggested mild surprise, but definitely not shock, as if she had perhaps witnessed this specific man perform similar feats on previous occasions that had become part of local folklore. Thomas looked down at the 3 incapacitated drunks with an expression that might have been pity or might have been complete indifference. "You are going to wait here quietly until the sheriff arrives. You are going to cooperate fully with whatever he decides. Understood?" None of them offered even a whisper of argument or protest. Then he turned to Amanda, his voice softened by the smallest measurable increment that only someone listening carefully would have detected. "You all right, ma'am?" Amanda found herself entirely unable to respond immediately. She had read his detailed service record through channels that cost more money than she wanted to calculate. She had studied the declassified portions of his extensive mission history until she could recite them from memory. She knew the impressive statistics and commendations and official bureaucratic language that described his considerable capabilities in sterile military terminology. But reading about Delta Force on paper and watching those capabilities deployed in person were 2 entirely different experiences separated by a gulf wider than the Grand Canyon. "You're him, you're Ghost." Thomas went completely still. It was the first moment since entering the cafe that his composure showed any visible crack in the facade he had constructed so carefully over 3 long years. Something flickered behind his dark eyes, something that looked almost like fear, or perhaps like the sudden pain of an old wound unexpectedly reopened by a stranger's careless touch. That name belonged to a different life, a different man entirely. One I deliberately buried 3 years ago in this small town and never intended to exhume. 6 hours before that pivotal moment, Amanda sat alone in her Denver penthouse, surrounded by the accumulated paperwork of an obsession that had consumed 24 months of her life without mercy or pause. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, casting long geometric shadows across the mahogany desk, buried beneath folders, photographs, and intelligence reports that most civilians would never be allowed to access, even if they possessed appropriate security clearances. She picked up a photograph that she had studied countless times until every detail was permanently etched into her memory. Captain David Clark smiled back at her, handsome in his formal dress uniform, eyes radiating the unshakable confidence that had defined him since childhood. Her older brother by 4 years, her protector, her hero, missing in action for 3 years. The military had declared him presumed dead 18 months ago with bureaucratic efficiency that left no room for hope or denial. But there had been no body, no funeral, no closure. Just a folded flag and condolences so hollow they echoed through the empty spaces of her heart like wind through abandoned buildings. Her private phone buzzed against the polished wood. The investigator she had retained displayed on the screen. A man who charged more per day than most people earned in a month, but who had proven worth every single penny through results that spoke louder than any advertisement. Miss Clark, I have something substantial, a final lead that looks extremely promising. Amanda straightened in her leather chair, her heart rate accelerating despite her practiced efforts to remain composed after so many false alarms and dead ends that had left her exhausted. Tell me everything you know. A man named Thomas Martinez, currently residing in a small town called Hollow Creek, Colorado, about 2 hours from Denver in the mountains. Former Delta Force operator, call sign Ghost. According to classified mission reports, I was able to access through certain channels that I will not name over an unsecured line. He was the last American soldier to see your brother alive during that final operation 3 years ago. Why has it taken 2 full years to locate this man? Because he vanished completely after that final mission. Miss Clark. Changed addresses without leaving any forwarding information. Cut all ties to his former life and associates. Lives like an actual ghost now, if you will pardon the irony of that observation. The military protected his identity with extreme prejudice. Multiple agencies have standing orders to shield his whereabouts from inquiry. He very clearly did not want to be found by anyone for any reason whatsoever. Amanda stared at David's photograph at the confident smile she had not seen in 3 long years except in pictures and dreams that grew hazier with each passing month. 3 years of watching their mother waste away from inconsolable grief, crying herself to sleep every single night without fail. 3 years of wondering whether her brother had died quickly and mercifully or suffered endlessly in some God-forsaken prison cell on the other side of the world. 3 years of a wound that absolutely refused to heal because it had no resolution, no ending, just an eternal question mark where closure should have been waiting. Send me the exact address immediately. I am driving there today. The journey from Denver took slightly over 2 hours. The highway gradually gave way to winding mountain roads that climbed steadily into the majestic Rockies until the trappings of civilization seemed to fall away, entirely replaced by endless forests and towering peaks. Hollow Creek appeared around a final bend, like something preserved in amber from a simpler and more innocent era. A main street lined with locally owned shops bearing hand-painted signs, a white church steeple rising above a thick canopy of evergreens, mountains framing everything in postcard perfection, their peaks still dusted with snow despite the advancing spring warmth that had turned Denver green and lush. Population just under 8,000 according to the faded sign at the town limits that looked like it had been standing since the 1970s without replacement. Amanda parked her Mercedes outside Pinewood grounds, the cafe her investigator had identified as Thomas Martinez's regular Saturday destination. According to surveillance reports compiled over the past 2 weeks, he visited every weekend without fail, always ordering black coffee, always sitting at the same spot at the bar, always leaving exactly 1 hour later, like clockwork. She checked the dashboard clock, 3:45. She would wait as long as necessary. The cafe owner, a woman in her mid-30s named Sharon, looked at Amanda with undisguised curiosity as she ordered a latte. Amanda knew she stood out in this rustic environment like a diamond in a coal mine. Her Armani suit cost more than most people here earned in 2 months of honest labor. Her Cartier watch caught the light with every movement, broadcasting wealth that seemed almost obscene in such humble surroundings. She was accustomed to boardrooms and power lunches with senators and generals, not cozy cafes with menus written on chalkboards in cheerful colored chalk. She selected a corner table with clear sight lines to the entrance, opened her laptop to maintain the appearance of productivity, and settled in to wait with the patience of someone who had already invested 2 years and was willing to invest 2 more if that was what the universe demanded. By 4 o'clock, the cafe had mostly emptied of its afternoon crowd. Only a handful of customers remained scattered among the weathered tables, including 3 men occupying a corner booth who had clearly been drinking steadily since well before noon arrived with any sense of responsibility. They were obviously locals based on their worn work clothes and easy familiarity with the surroundings, probably construction workers or ranch hands killing idle time before evening obligations called them back to reality. Amanda noticed them casting increasingly bold glances in her direction as the minutes accumulated into a full hour. She ignored them pointedly, keeping her attention fixed firmly on her laptop screen, even though she had stopped actually reading the quarterly reports displayed there. The front door swung open with a creak of hinges that needed oil. A man walked in, tall and lean with dark hair showing threads of gray at the temples and stubble that had not seen a razor in several days. He wore a faded flannel shirt jeans that showed evidence of mechanical work with grease stains on the thighs and boots scuffed with oil and dirt. He looked like a mechanic, one of thousands who formed the invisible backbone of small-town America, keeping cars running and families mobile. But Amanda recognized him instantly from the old military photograph her investigator had uncovered through channels she chose not to examine too closely. Older now, more worn by time and grief, but unmistakably Thomas Martinez. Ghost. Her heart hammered against her ribs with sudden violence that made her hands tremble slightly. 2 years of exhaustive searching, of frustrating dead ends and promising leads that evaporated into nothing but wasted time and money. And here he finally was, nodding casually to the cafe owner like an old friend, ordering black coffee in a voice too quiet for Amanda to hear clearly from her distance, settling onto a familiar stool at the bar, like it was simply another unremarkable Saturday afternoon in his deliberately unremarkable small-town life that held no echoes of the warrior he had once been. She started to rise from her seat, rehearsing the carefully prepared opening lines she had practiced for this exact moment during the long drive from Denver. But the 3 drunk men in the corner booth rose first. The sheriff arrived within 10 minutes of the phone call, a weathered man in his 50s who seemed more annoyed at having his Saturday evening disrupted than genuinely concerned about the specific details of the disturbance that had pulled him away from whatever he had been doing. He handcuffed all 3 drunks without asking many questions, loaded them efficiently into his patrol car with the ease of long practice, and drove away into the gathering dusk that painted the mountains purple and gold. In a town this small, everyone clearly knew that Thomas Martinez was simply not the type to start trouble without extremely good cause that would stand up to any reasonable scrutiny. After the cruiser's red tail lights disappeared around the corner, the cafe fell into an uncertain quiet. Most of the remaining customers had either fled during the brief confrontation or were now settling their checks with unusual haste and avoiding eye contact with everyone around them. Within a few minutes, only Thomas, Amanda, and Sharon remained among the empty tables and overturned chairs that bore silent witness to violence efficiently concluded. "Who are you?" Thomas asked. His voice turned cold and guarded with none of the gentle tone he had used moments before when asking if she was all right. "Amanda Clark." She watched his shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of recognition quickly suppressed beneath his careful neutral mask that revealed nothing to casual observers. "I don't know anyone by that name. You knew my brother, Captain David Clark, Afghanistan 3 years ago." The silence between them stretched taut as piano wire ready to snap under pressure. Thomas turned and walked toward the door with deliberate steps that suggested a man fleeing something he had spent years trying to escape. "Please." Amanda moved quickly, positioning herself directly between him and the exit before he could reach the threshold. Her expensive heels clicked on the wooden floor with sharp determination. "I have spent 2 years searching for you across 3 continents. You are the only person still alive who knows what actually happened to David. You are my last remaining hope for any kind of truth or closure. Your brother is classified missing in action. That is the official record, and that is all I am authorized to say about it to anyone under any circumstances. That's a military answer. I need the actual truth. Sometimes the military answer is the only answer that exists. Miss Clark." He is my brother." The words burst from her chest with force she could not contain or control any longer after 2 years of careful professional restraint. "My mother has cried herself to sleep every single night for 3 long years. We cannot grieve properly because we do not know if we should even be grieving. We cannot move forward with our lives because there is no resolution, no ending, no way to close the book and begin healing. Is he dead? Is he alive somewhere, suffering in ways I cannot even imagine? Did he die quickly or slowly? Did he know we were looking for him? We are trapped in this endless limbo of not knowing, and you are the only person on earth who can give us peace." Thomas stood motionless before her, his expression completely unreadable behind walls built from 3 years of practiced isolation. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like accumulated years of pain carried alone in darkness. "Some answers are worse than not knowing. Trust me on that." He stepped around her and pushed through the door into the fading Colorado afternoon, leaving her standing alone amid the scattered evidence of brief violence that had resolved nothing and changed nothing in the grand scheme of her search. Sharon approached quietly after Thomas disappeared from view down the street toward wherever he had parked his vehicle. He lost his wife 4 years ago. Cancer. She fought it bravely for 2 years before the end finally came and released her from suffering. The cafe owner's voice carried genuine sympathy that surprised Amanda with its warmth. His little daughter Emily is the only thing keeping him going now. Whatever happened to him over there in that war, it broke something fundamental in him. Something that I am not sure can ever truly be fixed or made whole again. Amanda stared at the door through which he had vanished, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I didn't come here to cause him more pain. I just need to know what happened to my brother." Sharon studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh something internally with careful consideration. "He lives at the edge of town, runs a small auto repair shop out of his garage. He'll be there tomorrow morning starting around 7. He always is, without fail, every single day, including Sundays and holidays. Why are you helping me?" "Because in the 3 years that man has lived here, I have never once heard him speak about his past to anyone. Not a single word about the war, or his service, or anything from before he arrived in Hollow Creek, carrying more grief than any human being should have to bear alone. Maybe it's finally time someone made him face it, instead of letting him hide forever." That night, Amanda lay awake in a cramped motel room at the edge of Hollow Creek, staring at water stains on the ceiling that formed shapes like continents on an alien world she would never visit. Outside her window, the Colorado darkness was absolute and complete, unmarked by the light pollution that made Denver's nights perpetually gray and artificial. She opened her laptop and navigated to the folder containing photographs of David that she had organized chronologically like a shrine to memory. Her brother at his West Point graduation standing ramrod straight, while their father pinned on his second lieutenant bars with trembling hands and glistening eyes full of pride. At her own college commencement 4 years later, beaming with pride that seemed to eclipse even their parents' joy at her academic achievements. At Christmas dinner 3 years ago, the last time she had seen him in person before his final deployment, carving the turkey with surgical precision, while their mother complained that he was doing it all wrong as usual, a complaint that had become tradition. She remembered their final conversation before he shipped out, standing together in the driveway of their parents' Connecticut estate while his taxi idled impatiently at the curb. The morning had been unseasonably warm for early spring, and David had worn his dress uniform with the quiet pride of a man who genuinely believed in what he was doing. "I'll be back before you know it, Mandy. Keep the company running smoothly while I'm gone. Why do you have to go at all? You're the heir. Dad built this company specifically for you to inherit someday. He needs you here learning the business, not overseas getting shot at by terrorists who will never appreciate your sacrifice." David had smiled with that infuriating patience of his, the same smile he had used when teaching her to ride a bicycle at age 6, when helping her study for college entrance exams, when consoling her after her first heartbreak left her sobbing in his arms. "Because some things matter more than quarterly profits, little sister. These people desperately need help, and I have the training to provide it. That has to count for something in this world. You could help plenty of people from a boardroom. The foundation alone donates millions every year to worthy causes. Writing checks is not the same as being there, Mandy. I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to know that my hands actually made a difference, not just my signature on donation forms processed by accountants who never see the faces of the people we help. That was David distilled to his essential essence, always putting the needs of others before his own comfort or safety, always believing that individual action could make a meaningful difference in a world that seemed determined to prove otherwise through endless cycles of violence and suffering. And then he had vanished into the chaos of Afghanistan like smoke dissolving into wind, and nothing in Amanda's world had ever been the same again, would ever be the same again. When David was officially declared missing in action, their father Henry collapsed almost immediately. Heart attack. The doctors explained clinically in their detached professional manner, brought on by severe stress and underlying conditions that had gone undiagnosed for years. But Amanda knew the truth that no medical chart would ever officially record. Henry Clark died of a broken heart exactly 6 months after learning his only son had disappeared, the grief simply more than his body could survive or process. Clark Defense Technologies fell to Amanda at 29 years old, a company that supplied advanced equipment to the American military and employed over 3,000 people whose livelihoods depended on her decisions. The responsibility of caring for her utterly devastated mother fell to her as well, along with maintaining the family estate and managing the charitable foundation her father had established decades earlier. And somewhere amid all those crushing obligations, the search for answers about David became her private obsession. The one thing she pursued entirely for herself rather than out of duty or responsibility to others. She had hired the best investigators money could access through networks most people did not know existed. She had leveraged every family connection to military and intelligence contacts accumulated over 3 generations of defense contracting. She had called in favors that her grandfather had earned during World War II and her father had accumulated during Vietnam. Every single lead had terminated in dead ends that left her exhausted and defeated until now. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Mandy. "It's late, sweetheart. Is everything all right, Mom? I found him." The soldier who was with David on that final mission. Silence stretched across the connection, broken only by the faint sound of her mother's breathing, becoming unsteady as old wounds reopened. After all this time. Her mother's voice cracked with emotion held barely in check by sheer force of will. "Mandy, please be careful. Some truths have the power to destroy us rather than heal us. I need to know, Mom. We both do. We cannot keep living like this forever, trapped in this limbo." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Amanda ended the call and stared at David's photograph until her eyes burned with exhaustion and unshed tears that she refused to let fall because crying would not change anything or bring her brother home. At 7 the next morning, Amanda parked outside a modest garage at the very edge of town where pavement surrendered to gravel and the mountains began their serious climb toward the sky. The hand-painted sign above the main bay read, "Martinez Auto Repair," in letters that had faded from years of sun exposure and Colorado weather. The building itself looked weathered but carefully maintained, the kind of place that survived through honest work and repeat customers rather than advertising or corporate backing. Through the open garage door she could see Thomas already at work beneath a raised pickup truck, his hands black with accumulated grease, completely focused on whatever mechanical problem demanded his attention with the intensity of a surgeon performing delicate operations. "You came." He did not look up from his work, did not stop what he was doing as if he had been expecting this confrontation from the moment she walked into the cafe yesterday. "I told you I don't give up easily. I'm beginning to understand that about you, Miss Clark." She stepped into the garage, her designer heels clicking incongruously on the oil-stained concrete that bore the marks of decades of hard labor. The space smelled of motor oil and metal shavings and honest work that built no grand fortunes but kept communities running. Tools hung in precise rows along pegboard walls, each item clearly assigned its designated position with the discipline of someone who valued order. In one corner above a cluttered workbench covered in automotive manuals and coffee cups, she noticed photographs pinned to a corkboard. A beautiful woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile that radiated kindness. A little girl with her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's kind expression, maybe 7 years old, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth. Your wife and daughter, she was beautiful. Your wife, I mean. She was. The past tense carried the weight of unprocessed grief that still cut deep despite 3 years of supposed healing. Amanda took a steadying breath, marshaling arguments she had rehearsed during the sleepless night. David wrote to me every single week while he was deployed. Letters at first, then emails when the infrastructure improved enough for regular internet access. He mentioned his team, constantly told me stories about the men he served with, the missions they accomplished, the bonds they formed under fire. He wrote about one man more than any other. Ghost, he called him. Said he was the most capable soldier he had ever met, the one who never failed when the stakes were highest. David admired you more than anyone else in that entire unit. Thomas's hands paused on whatever component he had been adjusting with careful precision. Your brother was an exceptional soldier, one of the finest officers I ever served under in 15 years of active duty, and he was a genuinely good man, which is rarer than it should be in this world. Was. Amanda stepped closer, her shadow falling across his workspace. You keep using the past tense. Is David dead? Thomas, I need to know the truth, whatever it costs to hear it. He finally turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed from chronic sleeplessness, haunted by something that had taken up permanent residence behind them and refused to leave no matter how much time passed. The truth is complicated. Then explain it to me. Please. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days, then lowered himself onto an overturned oil drum with the weariness of someone carrying burdens too heavy to put down even temporarily. After a silence that stretched uncomfortably long, he gestured toward a metal stool nearby. An invitation, or at least an acceptance that this conversation would happen, whether he wanted it to or not. 3 years ago, Kandahar Province. Our mission was to extract an American journalist who had been captured by Taliban forces 3 weeks prior. David was part of that operation. He was our commanding officer. The best tactical mind I ever worked under, bar none. Thomas stared at the floor as he continued, his voice falling into the flat monotone of someone reciting facts rather than reliving memories. 6 of us inserted that night, David commanding me as second in command. The infiltration went perfectly. We reached the compound, neutralized the guards, extracted the target without firing a shot. Everything according to planned textbook execution. Amanda held her breath, afraid that any interruption would stop this flow of information she had pursued for 2 years. Exfiltration is where it went wrong. We walked into a prepared ambush. 20-plus hostiles with heavy weapons waiting for us in a valley with no cover. We were pinned down with no air support available for 30 minutes. 30 minutes is an eternity when people are trying to kill you. What happened next? David made the call. Split the team. He took 3 men to draw fire and create a diversion. I took 2 men and the journalist and ran for the extraction point 2 kilometers away. Last thing David said was, "Get them out, Ghost." That's an order. And you followed that order. I followed that order. The words emerged like a confession of sins that could never be absolved or forgiven. I got the journalist to the helicopter. But when rescue teams reached David's position the next morning, they found 2 bodies, not 3. David was not among them. What does that mean? He was either killed and taken or captured alive. Intelligence couldn't determine which with certainty. Amanda's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Captured. After 3 years, could he still be alive? Taliban sometimes keeps valuable prisoners. Officers for ransom, for prisoner exchanges, for propaganda purposes. Thomas shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying the weight of knowledge earned through bitter experience. I spent a year calling in every favor, every contact I had accumulated over 15 years of service. Nothing solid ever came back. But nothing is not the same as knowing with certainty. What does that mean? In that world, nothing usually means dead without a body to bury or mourn over properly. You cannot know that with absolute certainty. No, I can't. Thomas met her eyes directly for the first time since beginning this explanation. But I left him there, Amanda. I followed orders like a good soldier. I saved the journalist who went home to his family and his career. But I left my friend behind in that valley to face whatever fate waited for him. That is what I know with absolute certainty. You did what he commanded. That's what soldiers do. That doesn't help me sleep at night. Hasn't helped for 3 years. Amanda studied this broken man who had buried himself in a small town, trading the identity of Ghost for the anonymous existence of a mechanic fixing cars for people who would never know what he had been or what he had sacrificed. Is that why you disappeared? Why you vanished so completely that it took me 2 years to find you? I'm finished with that life. I can't live that way anymore. My wife was diagnosed with cancer 6 months before that mission. Stage 4, terminal from the start. She died 4 months after I came home, and the only thing that kept me from following her into whatever comes next was my daughter. Emily needed me. Still needs me. So I came here and became someone else. Someone who fixes engines instead of breaking things. Someone who goes to sleep at night without seeing the faces of people I've killed or left behind. Amanda remained silent for a long moment, processing everything she had learned and everything it meant for the search that had consumed 2 years of her life. The morning sun climbed higher outside the garage, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber that seemed almost cruel in their beauty. Amanda returned to the garage the next morning with 2 cups of coffee and a determination that 3 years of grief had forged into something unbreakable. Thomas was already working on a Chevy Silverado, the hood raised like a metallic shield between them. He glanced up as her shadow fell across the engine block, accepted the coffee without comment, and returned to whatever diagnosis occupied his attention. Over the following days, a routine established itself with the organic inevitability of water finding its level. Amanda arrived each morning at 7 sharp. Thomas would acknowledge her presence with a nod, never quite meeting her eyes directly. They would drink coffee in silence while he worked, and gradually, in fragments scattered across hours, he began to speak about David in ways that transcended the clinical recitation of mission parameters. Your brother had this way of making every man in the unit feel like his survival mattered personally, not as assets or resources, but as human beings with families waiting at home. Thomas adjusted a fuel line with careful precision, his hands steady despite the weight of memories. Most officers treat Delta like chess pieces, valuable sure, but expendable when the mission requires sacrifice. David never operated that way. He'd spend hours planning contingencies to minimize risk, even when command pushed for speed over safety. Amanda leaned against the workbench watching his profile. He wrote about a mission in Helmand Province, something about extracting a village elder before Taliban reprisals. Said you climbed a cliff face in the dark to get a better vantage point for covering fire. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was David's idea, not mine. He spotted a route nobody else saw, calculated the angles while bullets were still flying, saved 3 lives that night because he refused to accept the obvious solution when a better one existed. The days accumulated into a week. Amanda found herself staying later each afternoon, less because new information emerged and more because the silences between Thomas's words felt less like barriers and more like breathing room where grief could exist without explanation. On the 8th day, Sharon arrived at the garage with a small girl whose dark curls bounced as she ran. Emily Martinez hit her father like a missile, wrapping thin arms around his waist with the ferocity of someone who understood that people you loved could disappear without warning. Daddy Thomas's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The hard lines around his mouth softened. His eyes lost their haunted quality and filled with something that looked almost like peace. He scooped Emily up despite the grease covering his hands, leaving dark smears on her yellow dress that she ignored completely. "Hey, sweetheart. How was school?" "Good. Miss Patterson says I'm the best reader in class now. I finished the whole chapter book about the girl who goes to the magic school." Emily's gaze landed on Amanda with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood, studying her with an intensity that felt disconcerting from someone so young. "Who are you?" "I'm a friend of your daddy's." Emily's expression shifted to something approaching skepticism. "Daddy doesn't have many friends. He says he likes being alone, but I think he's just sad." She tilted her head, examining Amanda's face with the clinical precision of a detective gathering evidence. "Your eyes look sad too, like you lost somebody important." Amanda felt her throat tighten unexpectedly, ambushed by insight from a 7-year-old who saw too much. I did lose someone. My brother. A long time ago. Is he in heaven with my mommy? I don't know, sweetheart. That's what I'm trying to find out. Emily nodded with the grave seriousness of someone who had already learned that not all questions have satisfying answers. Daddy says not knowing is the hardest part. He says that's why he stays busy fixing cars all day, so he doesn't have to think about the things he can't fix. Thomas cleared his throat, a warning note threading through the sound. Emily, why don't you show Miss Amanda your drawings while I finish this oil change? The child extracted a battered folder from her backpack with theatrical ceremony, spreading papers across the cleanest section of workbench like a museum curator arranging priceless artifacts. Crayon pictures of mountains rendered in impossible shades of purple, flowers blooming in colors that existed nowhere in nature except in the imagination of childhood, a yellow house with smoke curling cheerfully from its chimney. One drawing stopped Amanda's breath entirely. 3 figures occupied the page. A tall man holding hands with a small girl wearing pigtails. Above them, separated by clouds drawn in careful white spirals, floated a woman with delicate wings sprouting from her shoulders. That's Mommy. She watches us from heaven and keeps us safe. Emily's voice carried absolute conviction in a cosmology that made room for both loss and continued presence. Your daddy must miss her very much. He does. Sometimes I hear him talking to her at night when he thinks I'm asleep. He tells her about his day and asks if she's proud of him. The observation landed with devastating simplicity. Amanda glanced at Thomas, who had gone very still beneath the Silverado, his hands frozen on a wrench. That evening, Amanda's phone buzzed with an email marked urgent. Her investigator's name flashed on the screen. She opened the message standing in the motel parking lot while Colorado stars blazed overhead in patterns that Denver's light pollution rendered invisible. New intelligence just surfaced through channels I've been cultivating for 18 months. Rumors of an American prisoner transferred to Pakistan approximately 2 years ago. Physical description matches Captain Clark's service record. Height, build, distinguishing marks all align within acceptable variance. This is the most credible lead I've developed since beginning this investigation. Amanda's hands trembled as she read the words a second time, then a third, searching for caveats or qualifications that would transform hope back into another dead end. She dialed Thomas's number without conscious decision, her fingers acting on autopilot, while her mind struggled to process implications that seemed simultaneously too large and too fragile to trust. I need to see you now. It's about David. 20 minutes later, she stood in the garage surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil, while Thomas read the email on her phone. His face drained of color until he looked almost corpse-like under the fluorescent work lights. This could be anyone. Descriptions are notoriously unreliable, especially after 3 years and multiple transfers through hostile territory. Or it could be David. Amanda's voice came out steadier than she felt, hardened by 2 years of disappointments into something that refused to shatter at the first sign of possibility. Don't do this to yourself. Don't let hope destroy you when the odds are still astronomically against confirmation. Do what hope that my brother might still be drawing breath somewhere, that 3 years of searching might actually mean something beyond psychological torture. Thomas set the phone down with exaggerated care as if it might detonate. Even if this intel is accurate, even if there's genuinely an American prisoner matching David's description, what exactly do you expect me to do with that information? I'm a mechanic now. I fix transmissions and rotate tires. I don't have access to satellite reconnaissance or extraction teams or any of the resources that would be required to verify something like this. You have contacts, skills, connections that don't disappear just because you changed your address and started wearing different clothes. I left that world for reasons that haven't changed. My daughter needs stability, not a father who disappears on black ops missions that might leave her completely orphaned. Your ghost. The man who never failed a mission according to every record I could access. I failed David. The words erupted with force that rattled tools on their pegboard hooks. I followed orders and saved 3 people, but I left my commanding officer behind to face capture or death alone. That failure is the last thing I see every night before sleep, and the first thing waiting when I wake up. Don't ask me to compound it by abandoning my daughter to chase ghosts that probably don't exist." Amanda absorbed the outburst without flinching, recognizing the shape of guilt that had carved channels through 3 years of his life. "Then, don't fail him again. Help me find out if this lead has any substance. That's all I'm asking. Not a rescue mission, not putting yourself back in harm's way. Just use whatever contacts you still have to verify or eliminate this possibility so I can either move forward with hope or finally accept that he's gone." Thomas walked to the garage door and stared out at mountains turned silver by moonlight, his silhouette rigid with internal warfare that played out in the tension across his shoulders. "If I make those calls, if I activate networks I've kept dormant for 3 years, there will be consequences. Questions about why Ghost suddenly cares about an old mission. Attention from people and agencies that I've worked very hard to avoid. I understand, and I'm asking anyway." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross first. Finally, Thomas turned back toward her, his face set in lines that suggested a decision made against every instinct of self-preservation. "I'll reach out to Colonel James Reynolds. He was my handler during the last 5 years of active service. If anyone can access current intelligence on American prisoners in Pakistan without triggering official channels, it's him. But Amanda, you need to prepare yourself for disappointment. These rumors surface constantly. 99% of them are mistaken identity or deliberate misinformation designed to manipulate families exactly like yours. I've been preparing myself for disappointment every single day for 3 years. One more week won't break me." Thomas retrieved a phone from a locked drawer that Amanda had never seen him open, an older model that looked like it hadn't been powered on in years. He held it for a moment as if weighing whether crossing this threshold could ever be reversed. That night, Thomas sat beside Emily's bed watching his daughter sleep in a tangle of blankets and stuffed animals that she insisted needed protection from nightmares. Her breath came in the easy rhythm of childhood innocence that hadn't yet learned to fear the world's capacity for taking away everything that mattered. He remembered Laura's final coherent words before the morphine pulled her under for the last time. "Promise me you'll live, Thomas. Not just survive, not just go through the motions. Actually live for our daughter. Show her that love doesn't end when people leave. Promise me." He had promised, had kept that promise for 3 years by building a life so small and contained that nothing could threaten it. No missions, no risks, no possibilities of leaving Emily alone in a world that had already taken her mother. But was surviving the same as living? Was protecting Emily from loss the same as showing her how to hope despite loss? "Daddy." Emily's eyes fluttered open, reflecting the nightlight's soft glow. "Why aren't you sleeping?" "Just thinking, sweetheart. About the pretty lady. The one who's sad like you." Thomas managed to smile. "Sort of. About decisions and promises and whether I'm keeping the right ones." Emily sat up suddenly, focused with the intensity that sometimes made her seem decades older than 7. "Daddy, did you ever help people before you fixed cars?" "Yes, baby. I used to help people. Why did you stop?" "Because I couldn't save everyone. And watching people I cared about get hurt was more than I could handle anymore." Emily considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "But you saved some people, right?" "Yes. I saved some." "Then that's good. Mommy always said helping one person is like helping the whole world because every person matters completely to somebody else." The wisdom arrived wrapped in her mother's words, delivered by a child who understood legacy better than most adults ever would. Thomas pulled Emily close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just forget because I'm little." The next morning, Thomas powered on the dormant phone and dialed a number he had committed to memory years ago. The connection crackled with distance or encryption before a familiar voice answered. "This is Reynolds. Colonel, it's Ghost." Silence stretched long enough that Thomas wondered if the line had dropped. Then a long exhale that carried the weight of surprise and something approaching relief. "Ghost, I honestly didn't expect to hear from you again. Thought you'd gone dark permanently after Atlanta." I did, but something's come up that requires your particular skill set. I'm listening. I need information about a possible American prisoner in Pakistan. Transferred approximately 2 years ago. Physical description matches Captain David Clark from my final operation. Reynolds let out a low whistle. That's dangerous territory both politically and personally. Why dig up that particular grave after 3 years? Because his sister deserves to know if her brother is alive or actually dead. Because I owe David answers I never gave him when he was under my command. Because running from the past doesn't make it disappear. Fair enough. I'll make inquiries through channels that won't connect back to you or trigger official interest. Give me 72 hours. Thank you, James. I mean it. Ghost before you hang up. Are you okay? Really okay. Not just functional. I have a daughter who needs me. That keeps me vertical. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer I've got. Thomas ended the call and found Amanda waiting outside the garage with coffee and an expression that suggested she had been standing there long enough to hear at least part of the conversation. 72 hours, 72 hours. She nodded, accepting the timeline without protest. Then she surprised him by pulling a wrench from his toolbox and gesturing toward a Ford Escape waiting for its scheduled maintenance. Teach me something while we wait. Show me what you do all day, besides avoid your past. Over the next 2 weeks, an unexpected rhythm developed. Amanda arrived each morning and worked alongside Thomas, learning to change oil and replace brake pads and diagnose engine problems through sounds and smells that meant nothing to her corporate-trained senses. Her expensive suits gave way to jeans and work shirts that accumulated grease stains like badges of honor. She laughed when Thomas corrected her grip on a torque wrench, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "You're a natural. Give it 6 months and I could hire you on as an actual mechanic. My board of directors would have collective heart attacks if I showed up to quarterly meetings covered in motor oil. Would that necessarily be a bad thing?" The question hung between them, carrying implications neither seemed ready to examine directly. Emily became a regular fixture in these afternoons, doing homework in the corner, while the adults worked occasionally, offering observations that cut through pretense with the clarity only children achieved naturally. Miss Amanda smiles more now than when she first came here. Her eyes aren't as sad. Sharon stopped by one afternoon with fresh coffee and knowing looks that she distributed with equal generosity. "She's good for you, Thomas. It's nice seeing you actually engaged with something beyond routine maintenance. It's not like that. She's here because of her brother." "Sure. Keep telling yourself that." On the 14th day, Thomas's phone vibrated with an incoming call that made his pulse spike before conscious thought registered the implications. He stepped outside the garage into autumn sunshine that felt incongruously cheerful for the conversation ahead. Reynolds sounded tired, the exhaustion of someone who had spent 2 weeks navigating bureaucratic obstacles and moral ambiguities. "I found something, Ghost. You're not going to like it. Just tell me. There was an American prisoner, transferred to a compound outside Peshawar approximately 23 months ago. Satellite imagery from 3 weeks ago shows a Caucasian male, approximate age, mid-30s, height and build consistent with Captain Clark's service record. Facial recognition software gives an 87% match, which is about as good as we can get given image quality and the physical deterioration you'd expect from extended captivity." Thomas gripped the phone hard enough to make the case creak. "How certain are you?" "Certain enough that I'd bet my pension. This is David Clark. Uncertain enough that I can't get official confirmation without triggering channels that would alert people who would ask questions neither of us wants to answer. What's the political situation around extraction complicated? Doesn't begin to cover it. A rescue operation was actually proposed 6 months ago through proper channels. Pentagon denied authorization on geopolitical grounds. Pakistan is technically an ally, and unilateral military action on their soil could destabilize relationships we need for other strategic objectives. So they just abandoned him. Left an American officer to rot in a Pakistani prison cell because it's politically inconvenient to admit he exists. Welcome to modern warfare. Ghost. Sometimes soldiers become acceptable losses when diplomacy requires sacrificing inconvenient truths. Thomas ended the call and stood motionless in the parking lot while his mind raced through implications and possibilities that all led to the same impossible conclusion. Amanda emerged from the garage reading his expression with the accuracy of someone who had learned to interpret silence. "You found him. David is alive." The certainty in her voice left no room for doubt or qualification. Thomas nodded, unable to trust his own voice around the sudden constriction in his throat. Colonel Reynolds confirmed it through satellite reconnaissance and facial recognition. "Your brother is being held in a compound outside Peshawar, has been there for nearly 2 years. Amanda's knees buckled. She sat down hard on the concrete, all corporate poise dissolving into raw emotion that she had kept locked away through 2 years of professional determination. Tears came in waves that shook her entire frame. Thomas knelt beside her, placing one hand on her shoulder with the awkwardness of someone who had forgotten how to offer comfort. "He's alive. After 3 years, after everyone told me to accept he was gone, after my own mother begged me to stop searching and start grieving. He's actually alive." The words emerged between sobs that sounded like laughter and crying mixed together until they became indistinguishable. "There's a complication." Thomas forced himself to deliver the rest while she was still processing the primary revelation. "Pentagon denied a rescue operation 6 months ago. Too risky politically. Pakistan is officially an ally, and acknowledging we know about an American prisoner on their soil would create diplomatic incidents that could compromise other strategic interests in the region." Amanda's grief transformed into fury with the speed of a wildfire catching wind. "They know he's there. They know an American soldier is rotting in a prison cell, and they chose politics over bringing him home. That's the situation as it currently stands. Then I'll change the situation." She stood up, wiping tears away with the back of her hand, her posture shifting from devastated sister to corporate executive who had navigated boardrooms where billions of dollars hung on her decisions. "I'm flying to Washington tomorrow. My company supplies $400 million in equipment to the Pentagon annually. I have connections to 3 senators on the Armed Services Committee and personal relationships with contractors who have the president's ear. They will listen to me, or they'll learn what happens when Clark Defense Systems decides to make political decisions expensive. And if they still refuse?" Thomas watched her face harden into something that reminded him why David had once described his sister as the most formidable person he knew. "Then I'll find another way. I didn't spend 2 years searching just to accept bureaucratic cowardice as the final answer." Thomas looked through the garage door to where Emily sat doing homework, oblivious to the seismic shifts occurring in the adult world around her. "I promised my wife I'd live for our daughter. I can't go back to that life, Amanda. I can't risk making Emily an orphan for a mission that might fail. I'm not asking you to go to Pakistan. I'm not asking you to put on tactical gear and storm compounds. I'm just asking you to stand next to me while I fight for my brother in the only ways I know how." The request carried weight beyond its simple words, asking for partnership rather than resurrection of his ghost identity. Thomas considered it while autumn wind moved through the garage carrying the smell of motor oil and approaching winter. "That I can do." Amanda flew to Washington the next morning on a private jet that her company maintained for executive travel. She spent the flight reviewing talking points and political connections, while Thomas minded Emily and fielded questions about when Miss Amanda would come back. The first week in Washington produced meetings with mid-level officials who offered sympathy and stonewalling in equal measure. Amanda pushed harder, leveraging relationships her father had cultivated over 40 years of defense contracting. She met with Deputy Secretary Gerald Morrison on a Tuesday afternoon in an office overlooking the Potomac River. "Miss Clark, we're aware of the intelligence regarding your brother." Morrison's tone carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news to powerful people. "Then why haven't you acted? Why is an American soldier still imprisoned? While we pretend politics matters more than our obligations to the men and women who serve, Pakistan is a complicated ally. We need their cooperation on counterterrorism operations, on supply routes, on intelligence sharing that saves American lives. A unilateral military operation on their soil could destabilize relationships that took decades to build. My brother is an American soldier. We don't leave our people behind when it's convenient and abandon them when it's not. Sometimes geopolitics requires difficult choices that prioritize the greater good over individual cases, no matter how much we might wish otherwise." Amanda leaned forward, dropping any pretense of diplomatic courtesy. Unacceptable. Either you authorize a rescue operation, or I'll take this public in ways that make your political calculations irrelevant. I'll leak satellite imagery to every major news outlet. I'll testify before Congress about how the Pentagon knowingly abandoned an American hero. I'll make David Clark's face so recognizable that you'll have no choice but to act or explain to the American people why you chose not to. Morrison's expression hardened into something approaching respect mixed with irritation. That would be extremely unwise for your company's future government contracts. Are you threatening me, Mr. Secretary? I'm explaining consequences you seem determined to ignore. Amanda stood gathering her materials with deliberate precision. Then let me explain something to you. My father built Clark Defense Systems because he believed America's military deserved the best equipment available. But that belief was predicated on the assumption that America valued its soldiers enough to bring them home when they needed help. If I'm wrong about that assumption, then maybe my company should reconsider who we work with and what principles we're willing to compromise for profit. She walked out while Morrison was still processing the implicit threat to pull $400 million in annual contracts from Pentagon procurement. The second week brought meetings with Senator Patricia Holbrook of the Armed Services Committee, a veteran legislator who listened to Amanda's presentation with the careful attention of someone calculating political angles. I sympathize with your situation, Ms. Clark. Genuinely. But the votes aren't there for forcing executive action without presidential support. Not when it means potentially destabilizing our relationship with a nuclear-armed ally. Then help me get presidential support. Use your influence to make this a priority instead of another buried intelligence report. Holbrook shook her head slowly. You're asking me to risk significant political capital on a rescue mission that could fail catastrophically and leave multiple operators dead alongside your brother. That's not a gamble I can take without stronger assurances than satellite imagery and an 87% facial recognition match. Amanda spent the third week meeting with journalists, carefully leaking enough information to generate stories without revealing classified sources. The Washington Post ran a piece titled, "American Hero Abandoned Sister's 3-Year Fight for Answers." Public pressure began mounting through social media campaigns and veteran advocacy groups that picked up the story. On day 23, Morrison called her back to his office. The president has reconsidered. Your media campaign has created enough public pressure that inaction is no longer politically tenable. Amanda felt her heart rate spike despite years of training in maintaining corporate composure. You're authorizing a rescue operation. SEAL Team 6 will plan and execute an extraction. Timeline is 4 months. We need that long to coordinate intelligence assets in the region, establish extraction protocols, and create political cover for why American Special Operations Forces suddenly appear in Pakistani airspace. 4 months is too long. David's location could change. The compound could be moved or abandoned. It's the best offer you're going to get. Take it or leave it. Amanda left Washington with authorization secured, but a timeline that felt simultaneously too long and impossibly short. She called Thomas from the airport while waiting for her flight back to Denver. They approved it. SEAL Team 6 will extract David in 4 months. Thomas's relief came through the phone in a long exhale. He's coming home, Amanda. After 3 years, your brother is finally coming home. Amanda returned to Hollow Creek and surprised herself by how much the small town had started feeling less like a temporary way station and more like somewhere she could imagine staying. She called Richard Anderson, her CFO, from the motel room that had become more familiar than her Denver penthouse. Richard, I'm establishing a satellite office in Colorado Springs. Make it official through the board. Colorado Springs. Amanda, this sounds personal rather than strategic. It's both. We're opening an R&D center focused on high-altitude drone technology and autonomous systems. Colorado Springs has NORAD, the Air Force Academy, and more aerospace contractors per capita than anywhere except Southern California. It's perfect for what we need. And how much of this decision is influenced by a certain mechanic in a town 45 minutes from Colorado Springs? Amanda smiled despite herself. I'm not going to dignify that with a response. Draw up the paperwork and present it to the board next month. I'll handle any objections personally. The office space materialized within 3 weeks, a modern facility that felt jarring compared to Hollow Creek's rustic aesthetic. Amanda split her time between corporate responsibilities and afternoons at the garage, learning more about automotive repair than she had ever imagined needing, while Emily did homework and occasionally offered observations about adult behavior that hit uncomfortably close to truth. Daddy smiles more when you're here. Not the pretend smile he uses with customers, the real one that makes his eyes crinkle. Thomas had proposed a camping trip during Emily's spring break with the casual tone of someone extending an invitation that carried no particular weight. Amanda accepted before fully processing that she had never been camping in her entire life. "You've never slept in a tent, never cooked over a campfire?" Thomas's disbelief seemed almost theatrical. "I grew up in Connecticut attending private schools and summering in the Hamptons. The closest I came to roughing it was staying at a 4-star hotel instead of a 5-star during business travel." "Well, you're in for an education then." They drove into the Rockies on a Friday afternoon with Emily chattering excitedly about all the things Miss Amanda needed to learn about proper camping. The site Thomas chose sat beside a glacial lake that reflected mountains like a mirror polished by nature itself. Teaching Amanda to set up a tent became an exercise in patience that tested Thomas's ability to explain concepts he had internalized decades ago. Emily found the whole process hilarious, offering helpful critiques about how Miss Amanda was doing it wrong while demonstrating the correct technique with the confidence of someone who had done this dozens of times. Dinner involved hot dogs roasted over a fire that Amanda built after 3 failed attempts and significant coaching. Emily declared them the best hot dogs ever created, though Amanda suspected this evaluation had more to do with novelty than culinary achievement. After Emily fell asleep in her tent, exhausted from a day of hiking and exploring, Thomas and Amanda sat by the dying fire while stars blazed overhead in patterns that rendered city dwelling absurd by comparison. "Thank you for this. I didn't realize how much I needed to remember that the world contains more than boardrooms and quarterly reports. City life, crushing your soul. I forgot what silence sounds like, forgot that problems can be solved with hands and effort rather than lawyers and leverage." Thomas added another log to the fire, watching sparks spiral upward into darkness. "Out here you can actually hear yourself think instead of just reacting to whatever crisis demands immediate attention. What do you think about when you can hear yourself?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Lately, second chances. Whether people can actually change or just become better at hiding who they've always been." The words hung between them with implications neither seemed ready to examine directly. Amanda shifted closer to the fire as temperature dropped toward freezing. "Do you think David will be the same person we remember? After 3 years in captivity, nobody comes back from something like that unchanged. The question isn't whether he'll be different, it's whether he'll be able to find a way to live with who he becomes." "How did you do it? Find a way to live after everything you saw and did?" Thomas stared into flames that cast dancing shadows across his face. "I didn't, not really. I just found something that mattered more than my own damage. Emily needed a father who could function, so I learned to function well enough to keep her safe and relatively stable. Whether that counts as actually living or just advanced survival is a question I'm still figuring out." Amanda wanted to say something about how helping her search for David suggested movement toward actual living rather than mere survival, but the moment passed before words formed properly. They sat in companionable silence until the fire burned down to coals, and cold drove them toward their respective tents. During the 3rd month of waiting, Colonel Reynolds called with news that made Thomas's blood run cold. "We have a problem. Satellite coverage of the target compound went dark 3 days ago. Pakistan moved heavy anti-aircraft equipment into the region and we can't get clean overhead imagery anymore. Does that mean they moved David unknown? Could be routine defensive upgrades unrelated to the prisoner. Could mean they're preparing to relocate him. Could mean they know we're watching and deliberately obscured our surveillance capabilities. If you can't confirm his location, will they scrub the mission? Almost certainly. Pentagon won't authorize a SEAL team insertion without current intelligence confirming the asset is still on site." Thomas ended the call and found Amanda working on brake pad replacement with the focused intensity of someone using physical labor to avoid thinking about larger anxieties. When he explained the situation, her carefully maintained composure shattered into panic that made her hands shake too hard to hold tools safely. "No, we were so close. We can't be back to uncertainty after everything we've gone through to get this far. We're not back to the beginning. We know David was there. We just need to confirm current location. How you said satellites can't penetrate the new defenses." Thomas felt the old patterns activating despite 3 years of deliberate dormancy. Ghost emerging from retirement, whether he wanted resurrection or not. "I still have contacts in the region, people who owe me favors or information from operations that never made official records. Give me 2 weeks. You're going to reach out to intelligence assets in Pakistan." That's incredibly dangerous for someone who's supposed to be a retired mechanic in Colorado. Dangerous is relative. Letting your brother get moved to an unknown location because I was too scared to make phone calls seems like the bigger risk. He spent the next week making calls to numbers he had memorized but never written down, speaking in careful euphemisms to people who understood exactly what he needed without requiring explicit requests. Information trickled back through channels that existed outside official recognition, piece by piece assembling a picture of David's current status. On day 12, a former asset in Peshawar sent confirmation through encrypted channels that took 3 relays to reach Thomas's burner phone. The prisoner had been moved to a secondary compound 20 kilometers south of the original location. Different security profile, but same general region and accessibility for extraction operations. Thomas forwarded the intelligence to Colonel Reynolds, who verified through independent sources before passing it up the chain of command that would ultimately authorize or cancel the mission. "Mission is back on. Extraction in 2 weeks. Pentagon wants me to ask if you'd consider consulting as tactical advisor given your familiarity with the target and the operational parameters." The request landed like a physical blow. Thomas looked at Emily doing homework in the corner of the garage, oblivious to the decision being demanded of her father. "I'll think about it. You have 48 hours. After that, they'll proceed with or without your input." That night, Thomas explained the situation to Emily with the honesty he had promised Laura he would maintain about important decisions. "There's a man who needs help, a good man who's been trapped in a bad place for a very long time. The people who want to help him asked if I could give them advice about the best way to keep everyone safe during the rescue." "Is it Miss Amanda's brother? The one she's been looking for?" "Yes, sweetheart, it's her brother." Emily considered this with the gravity she brought to important matters. "Are you scared to help them?" "Very scared. Because helping means remembering things I've tried very hard to forget. And because if something went wrong, I might not come back to you." "But you're going to help anyway, aren't you?" "Why would you think that?" "Because Mommy always said that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared, but you do the right thing anyway." Thomas pulled his daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo while considering wisdom delivered by a 7-year-old who understood legacy better than most adults ever achieved. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart, Daddy. You just forget sometimes because I'm little." The next morning, Thomas called Reynolds back with his decision. He would fly to Qatar for mission planning and serve as tactical consultant during the operation. He would not participate in the actual extraction, but would be available for real-time intelligence and course corrections if situations evolved beyond initial parameters. "Emily, you'll stay with Sharon while I'm gone. Miss Amanda will check on you every day." "How long will you be away?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on how quickly everything develops." "You're coming back though, right?" "You promise?" "I promise, sweetheart. I'm just giving advice from a safe location. I'm not going into dangerous places anymore." The lie felt necessary, even as it tasted like ash in his mouth. 1 week before Thomas was scheduled to fly to Qatar, Amanda picked Emily up from school on a Tuesday afternoon while Thomas finished a transmission rebuild that couldn't wait. The elementary school sat 3 blocks from the town center, a brick building that looked like it had been serving Hollow Creek's children since the 1950s. Amanda waited in the pickup line, watching parents and kids stream out with the organized chaos of dismissal routines perfected through repetition. 3:30 came and went. 3:45 passed without Emily appearing among the thinning crowd of students. By 4 o'clock, Amanda's concern shifted to active worry. She parked and went inside, finding Emily's teacher organizing materials for the next day. "I'm here to pick up Emily Martinez. Has she been kept after for some reason, Emily?" "No, she left with her uncle about 20 minutes ago. Uncle Emily doesn't have an uncle." The teacher's face went pale as implications registered. "He said he was family. Said Thomas called and asked him to pick Emily up because of an emergency at the garage." Amanda ran to her car, calling Thomas while her hands shook hard enough to make dialing difficult. "Thomas, Emily is gone." What do you mean gone?" "Someone took her from school. They told the teacher it was her uncle that you sent him to pick her up. I'm on my way." He arrived at the school 7 minutes later, moving with the controlled urgency of someone for whom panic was a luxury that operational thinking couldn't afford. They checked with the principal, confirmed the timeline, got a description of the man who claimed to be Emily's uncle. White male, approximately 40 years old, military-bearing scar across his left cheek. Thomas went very still, his face draining of color in a way that suggested recognition. "What, do you know him maybe? I need to check something." They returned to the parking lot where Amanda's Mercedes sat in isolation now that other parents had collected their children. A piece of paper rested under the windshield wiper, folded once and weighted against wind. Thomas unfolded it with hands that had gone completely steady through whatever internal shutdown allowed operators to function during crisis. Block letters in permanent marker delivered a message that required no elaboration. "Cancel the Pakistan operation or you'll never see the girl again." Below the text, a phone number. Thomas pulled out his burner phone and dialed without hesitation. The call connected after 2 rings to a voice distorted by electronic modulation that rendered gender and age unidentifiable. "Ghost. It's been a long time. Who are you?" "Someone who lost people because of you." "Afghanistan. 2019. Operation Red Sand. Remember that one?" Thomas's mind raced through possibilities, sorting operational histories and potential enemies with the speed of someone whose survival had once depended on accurate threat assessment. "I remember." "Then you understand why this is happening. You took my family, now I take yours. Fair trade. Let me talk to her. Let me know she's safe." Brief silence. Then Emily's voice, small and terrified in a way that made something in Thomas's chest crack. "Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart. I'm going to get you back, I promise." The call cut off before he could say more. Amanda stood frozen, watching Thomas transform into someone she had only glimpsed in fragments, Ghost fully emerging, all the civilian softness burning away to reveal the operator beneath. "What do we do?" "Call the police, FBI numb. These people are professionals. They'll kill her if we bring official attention. This is targeted, personal, designed to force my hand." Then what Thomas's voice dropped to something flat and cold that carried no emotion whatsoever. "I'm going to get our daughter back." Thomas called Colonel Reynolds from the parking lot while Amanda paced circles around the Mercedes, her corporate composure completely shattered by the kind of crisis that no boardroom training could prepare anyone to handle. "I need satellite access. Hollow Creek area, last 6 hours. Any vehicle movements that match timing and description." Reynolds didn't waste time with questions about why Ghost suddenly needed surveillance on his own hometown. "Give me 10 minutes. The satellite footage came through on Thomas's secure phone, showing a black van license plates obscured, leaving the school parking lot at 3:32 and heading east into the national forest that bordered Hollow Creek's eastern edge. The van disappeared from overhead coverage approximately 40 minutes later in a region thick with mining roads that hadn't seen legitimate use in decades. Thomas studied the terrain with the focus of someone translating satellite imagery into 3-dimensional tactical space. His finger traced a route that terminated at a cluster of structures barely visible through forest canopy. Old mining compound. Been abandoned since the 70s. Perfect isolation. Multiple access points. Defensible position if you know the terrain. "How do you know all that?" "Emily and I camped near there last summer. She wanted to explore the old buildings, but I wouldn't let her get close because the structures looked unstable. I should have paid more attention to the layout." Amanda stopped pacing long enough to grip his arm with force that would leave bruises. "You know where she is? We can call the FBI now. Get professionals involved." "No. Whoever took her chose that location because they know I'd recognize it. They're expecting me to come alone." If authorities show up, Emily becomes a liability they eliminate rather than leverage they can use. You can't go in there by yourself. That's suicide. Thomas opened the locked drawer in his truck bed storage compartment that hadn't been accessed in 3 years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, waited equipment that belonged to Ghost, rather than the mechanic Thomas had pretended to be. Glock 19 with 3 magazines, tactical knife, lightweight body armor that could be worn under civilian clothes, night vision monocular, and a radio frequency scanner for detecting electronic surveillance. I won't be unprepared, and I won't be reckless, but I will get our daughter back tonight. The possessive pronoun landed between them with weight that transcended the immediate crisis. Amanda registered it but chose not to examine implications while Emily remained in danger. I'm coming with you. No, you're staying here where it's safe. She's my responsibility. I was supposed to protect her while you worked and I failed. I don't get to sit safely in a motel while you risk everything to fix my mistake. Thomas turned to face her fully, his expression carrying the kind of absolute certainty that made argument impossible. You didn't fail anyone. You loved her like family, which is exactly what she needed. But this part requires skills you don't have and training you've never received. Let me do what I do best, then bring her home to both of us. The sunset painted the Rockies in shades of amber and crimson that seemed obscene given the circumstances. Thomas changed into dark clothing strapped on the body armor and checked the Glock with movements so practiced they looked like meditation. Amanda watched him transform from mechanic to operator with the fluid inevitability of someone shedding a costume that had never quite fit properly. If something goes wrong, if I don't come back, there's a letter in the garage safe. Combination is Emily's birthday. It explains everything she needs to know about her mother and about why I made the choices I made. Nothing is going wrong. You're Ghost. You don't fail missions. I failed David. The words emerged flat and final. I won't fail Emily. Thomas drove alone into the national forest as twilight dissolved into full darkness, broken only by stars and a crescent moon that provided barely enough ambient light for navigation without headlights. He parked 3 kilometers from the target location and moved through terrain on foot with the silence of someone for whom noise discipline was as automatic as breathing. The mining compound materialized from darkness exactly where satellite imagery had suggested. 3 main structures in various states of decay surrounded by equipment that had been rusting since before Thomas was born. Light leaked from the central building through gaps in weathered boards confirming occupation. Thomas circled the perimeter, counting thermal signatures through the night vision monocular. 3 heat sources widely spaced around the compound in positions that suggested guard rotations rather than casual occupation. Professional setup, which aligned with his assessment of who had taken Emily and why. The first guard stood smoking near the western approach, his weapon slung casually across his back in a way that suggested boredom rather than alertness. Thomas approached from downwind, moving with patience that treated time as abundant resource rather than pressing constraint. The guard never heard Thomas close the final 3 meters. The chokehold cut off blood to his brain with pressure calibrated to induce unconsciousness without causing permanent damage. Thomas lowered the body, gently zip-tied wrists and ankles, and moved toward the next position. The second guard was more alert, scanning the tree line with night vision that made direct approach impossible without detection. Thomas found a fist-sized rock, calculated angles and distances with the precision of someone who understood ballistics intuitively, and threw it 20 meters north of his actual position. The guard's attention snapped toward the sound. Thomas covered the distance during that moment of distraction, delivering a strike to the nerve cluster behind the ear that dropped the man instantly. The third guard saw him coming despite Thomas's best efforts at stealth. The man's hand went for the pistol on his hip mouth, opening to shout warning. Thomas closed the distance faster, driving a knee into the guard's solar plexus hard enough to empty lungs completely. The pistol clattered away across gravel. Thomas delivered a precise strike to the temple that shut down consciousness like flipping a switch. 3 guards neutralized in under 4 minutes without firing a shot or raising an alarm. Thomas approached the central building, listening for sounds that would indicate how many hostiles remained inside and where Emily was being held. A voice carried through the weathered walls, male and vaguely familiar, in a way that nagged at Thomas's memory. "Your father's late." Maybe he decided the mission in Pakistan matters more than saving one little girl. Emily's response came back with defiance that made Thomas simultaneously proud and terrified. "My daddy always keeps his promises." "He's coming." Thomas moved to a window gap peering through into an interior lit by battery-powered lanterns. Emily sat in a wooden chair, hands zip-tied behind her back, but otherwise apparently unharmed. Two men occupied the room with her. One stood near the door with a rifle held in a posture that suggested military training. The other sat on a crate facing Emily, his profile finally resolving into recognition that made Thomas's blood run cold. The scar across the left cheek belonged to a Taliban translator who had worked with U.S. forces during Operation Red Sand in 2019. A man named Fareed, whose brother had died during a raid that Thomas had led after intelligence indicated the compound housed high-value targets. The intelligence had been accurate, but Fareed's brother had been in the wrong place during the assault, caught in crossfire that left him dead despite never having fired a weapon himself. Thomas had processed the incident through official channels, filed the required reports, and moved on to the next mission, because that was what operators did when war produced collateral damage. He had never considered that someone might carry that death across years and continents to exact revenge in a Colorado forest. The tactical situation presented clear problems. Two armed hostiles, one with direct line of sight to Emily, the other positioned to respond to any entry attempt. Standard room-clearing protocols would risk Emily catching fire during the initial breach. Thomas needed a different approach. He circled to the back of the building, finding a door that hung crooked on rusted hinges. The wood had rotted enough around the lock mechanism that he could pry the entire assembly free with minimal noise. The door swung open with a creak that seemed deafening in the silence but didn't carry far enough to alert the men in the front room. Thomas moved through the interior with exquisite care, placing each footstep where old floorboards looked most solid and least likely to betray his presence with squeaks or groans. The hallway connecting the rear entrance to the main room stretched perhaps 15 feet, but covering that distance took nearly 3 minutes of patient movement. He reached the doorway threshold and assessed final positions. The guard near the door remained focused outward, watching for approach from the main entrance. Fareed had shifted to face Emily, more directly, his attention on the child rather than potential threats. Neither man showed any indication they suspected Ghost had already penetrated their perimeter and eliminated their external security. Thomas moved, not with the explosive speed of action movies, but with the efficient precision of someone who understood that violence was physics applied with intention. He covered the distance to the door guard in 3 long strides, delivering a kick to the back of the knee that collapsed the man's stance while simultaneously driving the rifle barrel toward the ceiling. The weapon discharged deafening in the enclosed space, but sending the round harmlessly into aged rafters. Thomas wrenched the rifle free and used it as a blunt instrument across the guard's temple, dropping him in a heap that knocked over a lantern and sent shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Fareed spun toward the commotion, his hand reaching for the pistol holstered at his hip. Thomas crossed the room before the weapon cleared leather, driving the rifle stock into Fareed's wrist with enough force to break small bones. The pistol fell away. Fareed lunged forward despite the injury, driving a shoulder into Thomas's midsection and carrying both men backward into the wall with impact that rattled the entire structure. They grappled in close quarters, where Thomas's superior training competed against Fareed's desperate strength and years of accumulated rage. Fareed got his functioning hand around Thomas's throat, squeezing with the kind of pressure that indicated intent to kill rather than merely incapacitate. Thomas drove a thumb into the pressure point behind Fareed's ear, forcing the grip to loosen enough for him to break free. He followed with an elbow strike to the jaw that snapped Fareed's head sideways and created distance. Before Fareed could recover, Thomas swept his legs and drove him face first into the floor, following him down with a knee to the spine that pinned him in place. Daddy Emily's voice cut through the aftermath of violence, small and terrified, but alive and whole. Thomas maintained pressure on Fareed while reaching for the zip ties on his belt. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now." He secured Fareed's wrists and ankles with the efficiency of someone who had performed this sequence hundreds of times under more stressful conditions. Only then did he move to Emily, cutting through the restraints that held her with the tactical knife that lived in his boot sheath. She wrapped thin arms around his neck with force that made breathing difficult, her whole body shaking with delayed reaction to terror she had been holding at bay through sheer stubborn will. "I knew you'd come. I told them you always keep your promises. Always, baby. Always." Thomas carried her out of the building past the unconscious guards into forest that had gone quiet in response to the gunshot. He called Sheriff Kenneth Harris from the truck while Emily sat buckled in the passenger seat wrapped in his jacket despite the mild evening temperature. "Kenneth, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention and complete discretion." The sheriff arrived with 2 deputies 40 minutes later, taking custody of Fareed and his associates without asking questions that would require answers Thomas couldn't provide on unsecured channels. Kenneth had been a ranger before becoming small-town law enforcement. He recognized the signs of professional operation and understood when not to probe too deeply into methods that had produced results. "We'll process them on kidnapping charges. Federal charges will probably follow given the interstate nature and the whole terrorism angle. You'll need to make a statement, but that can wait until tomorrow." "Thank you, Kenneth. I mean it. That little girl is lucky to have you. Not many fathers could do what you just did." Thomas drove Emily back to Hollow Creek where Amanda waited in the garage with anxiety that had transformed into barely controlled panic over the 3 hours since he had disappeared into the forest. She saw them through the window and ran outside, pulling Emily into an embrace that lifted the child off the ground. "I was so scared. I thought I'd lost you." "Miss Amanda was worried about me." Emily's surprise suggested she hadn't fully grasped how much Amanda had come to care about her beyond professional obligation to help Thomas. "Of course I was worried. You're important to me." The simple statement carried weight that all 3 of them felt without needing explicit acknowledgement. They went inside where Amanda made hot chocolate while Thomas checked Emily for injuries beyond the rope burns on her wrists that would heal in a few days. After Emily finally fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion overwhelming the adrenaline that had kept her alert through the ordeal, Thomas and Amanda sat in the kitchen, speaking in voices barely above whispers. "You got her back. I didn't think it was possible, but you actually got her back. I told you I don't fail when it matters most." Amanda studied him across the table, seeing past the mechanic facade to the warrior underneath. "You're still going to Qatar, aren't you? Still going to serve as tactical advisor for David's extraction. The mission is in 10 days. They need someone who understands the terrain and the operational parameters. I'm the logical choice. After what just happened, after someone targeted Emily because of your past, you're willing to put yourself back in that world?" Thomas looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully for the first time in hours, her face relaxed in the security of knowing her father had come for her exactly as promised. Emily told her kidnapper that, "I always keep my promises. I promised David I'd get that journalist home safely 3 years ago, and I did. But I never promised to bring him home, never even tried to find out if he survived. That failure has eaten at me every single day since. If there's a chance to fix it to bring your brother back, then I have to try. Not as Ghost returning to active duty, but as someone who owes a debt that can't be repaid any other way." The flight to Qatar departed from Denver International 10 days later. Thomas held Emily tight in the airport terminal while Amanda stood close enough to be included in the embrace without making it awkward. "You're coming back, right, Daddy? You promised. I'm not going into danger, sweetheart. I'm just helping people plan the safest way to bring Miss Amanda's brother home. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then I'll be back." The lie tasted like betrayal even though it served Emily's peace of mind. Amanda caught his eye over Emily's head, her expression acknowledging the necessary fiction without challenging it where Emily could hear. "Sharon will take excellent care of you, and Miss Amanda will call every single night to make sure you're doing okay." The boarding call interrupted further delays. Thomas forced himself to release Emily to walk toward the gate to not look back because looking back would make leaving impossible. Amanda followed him to the security checkpoint. "Bring him home. Whatever it takes, bring David home. I will. And then we'll figure out what comes next for all of us." The words hung between them with implications neither was ready to examine directly, while geography and circumstance kept them separated. Amanda watched him disappear through security, then returned to Emily with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Qatar arrived swathed in heat that transformed the tarmac into a shimmering mirage. Lieutenant Michael Shaw met Thomas at the airbase with the efficient courtesy of someone who had reviewed files and understood exactly who Ghost had been before retirement. "We've got mission planning scheduled for tomorrow at 0600. Tonight, get some rest and acclimate to the time zone." The briefing room held a dozen SEALs and support personnel, all focused on satellite imagery that showed the compound where David Clark had spent nearly 2 years in captivity that no official records acknowledged. Shaw walked through the approach vectors, guard rotations, structural weak points, and extraction protocols with the precision of someone who had planned hundreds of similar operations. South wall shows the least fortification. Guard rotation changes at 0200, giving us a 15-minute window before the next shift checks the perimeter. Thomas studied the imagery, comparing it to terrain analysis and historical patterns from similar compounds he had raided during active duty. The 15-minute window assumes the guards maintain consistent discipline. In my experience, third shift tends to get sloppy around that time because it's the dead zone before dawn. You might get closer to 20 minutes if you time it right. Shaw made notes on the digital overlay. "Good catch. Anything else jump out the underground section? Satellite can't penetrate, but thermal imaging suggests the prisoner is being held below grade. That means stairs or a ramp, which creates a choke point during extraction if things go loud. We're planning for silent entry and exit. No shots fired unless absolutely necessary. Plans are great until first contact. I'd recommend having a contingency for fighting your way out in case someone gets lucky or unlucky." The planning consumed 4 days of iterative refinement, incorporating intelligence that trickled in from assets on the ground and adjusting for variables that couldn't be predicted with certainty. Thomas participated in every session, contributing insights earned through experience that textbook tactics couldn't replicate. On the 5th day, Shaw approached him after the afternoon briefing with a question that had apparently been building since Thomas arrived. "Your file says you were the best breacher Delta ever produced. Success rate on hostage extractions was literally perfect over 12 years. Why'd you walk away from that?" Thomas considered deflecting with the standard answer about wanting more time with family. But Shaw deserved truth from someone asking honest questions. "I didn't walk away. I ran. Because watching people die even when you do everything right eventually breaks something in you that doesn't heal. I thought if I stopped being Ghost and became someone else entirely, I could outrun the weight of everyone I failed to save. Turns out geography doesn't work that way. That's why you came back to save this one guy, to try fixing one failure out of many. If it works, maybe I can finally sleep without seeing David's face asking why I left him behind." Thomas called Amanda each night after Emily's bedtime. Their conversations walking careful lines between discussing mission details that couldn't be shared over unsecured connections and maintaining the fiction that he remained safely distant from actual danger. "Emily keeps drawing pictures of the three of us together. You, me, and her. She's already planning what we'll do when you get back. What kind of things? Camping again, teaching you more about car repair. Something about building a treehouse, though I'm not sure where that idea came from. Probably from some book she's reading. Kid consumes stories like oxygen." "Thomas, when this is over, when David is home, we need to talk about what happens next. For all of us." The implications hung heavy across the distance, separating Qatar from Colorado. "I know. And we will. I promise." D-Day arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that felt inappropriate for launching operations into hostile territory. The SEAL team assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, checking equipment with the ritualistic precision of professionals who understood that small details meant the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Thomas would remain in the Tactical Operations Center, monitoring communications and providing real-time analysis if situations evolved beyond planned parameters. Shaw had made it clear that Ghost's value lay in his knowledge and experience, not in putting a 50-year-old former operator back into direct combat after 3 years of retirement. 4 helicopters lifted off at 0100, flying low and fast toward the Pakistani border in airspace that technically required permissions nobody had bothered requesting through official channels. Thomas watched their progress on satellite feeds tracking heat signatures against terrain that looked alien through infrared imaging. The insertion went perfectly. 16 SEALs touched down 2 kilometers from target and moved toward the compound with the coordinated efficiency of a machine calibrated through countless hours of training. External guards were neutralized silently, their bodies secured and hidden before anyone inside could notice their absence. The breach on the south wall happened exactly as planned, explosive charges creating an opening large enough for entry without collapsing surrounding structure. Team Alpha secured the perimeter while Team Bravo descended into the underground section where thermal imaging suggested the prisoner's location. "Ghost, we've reached the holding cell. Stand by." Shaw's voice came through the communications feed with tension that suggested complications beyond simple locked doors. "Copy that. What's your status?" "We've got him. Positive ID on Captain Clark. But he's in rough shape. Looks like he can barely walk, and we're taking fire from unexpected hostiles who weren't showing on thermal before we breached." "How many hostiles? 15, maybe 20. They knew we were coming." The words triggered alarms that Thomas's instincts had been whispering since the mission launched too smoothly. He pulled up the satellite feed looking for signs of reinforcements or ambush positions that pre-mission intelligence had missed. "Shaw, you need to abort and extract now. This smells like a deliberate trap designed to draw you into a kill zone." "Negative. We're not leaving without the asset." Team Alpha shift to defensive perimeter and prepare to cover our exfiltration. The gunfire intensified coming through the communication feed as sharp cracks that punctuated Shaw's commands. Thomas watched helplessly as heat signatures converged on the SEAL positions. Superior numbers, overwhelming tactical superiority through sheer volume of fire. RPG inbound. The explosion registered on satellite imagery as a thermal bloom that temporarily whited out the screen. When resolution returned, the south wall showed significant structural damage and 3 heat signatures weren't moving. Shaw report. "We're taking casualties. Hernandez and Park are down. We need immediate air support or we're not making it out of here. Air support is 8 minutes out. Can you hold that long?" "We don't have a choice." Thomas made a decision that violated every protocol and ignored every reasonable argument against 50-year-old retired operators inserting themselves into active combat zones. "Get me a helicopter and full kit. I'm going in." The operations commander, a full colonel who outranked everyone in the room, stepped directly into Thomas's path. "Absolutely not. You're a civilian consultant with no authority to participate in combat operations. That team is dying because someone set a trap using intelligence we should have caught. I know that terrain better than anyone in this room, and I owe David Clark a debt that's 3 years overdue. Get me a helicopter or get out of my way while I find one myself." The colonel studied him for 3 seconds that felt like hours, calculating risk against potential reward. "Get him equipped. If this goes sideways, it's on both of us." Thomas was airborne 6 minutes later in a helicopter that flew faster and lower than safety protocols recommended, covering ground that the trapped SEAL team had approached cautiously during their insertion. The pilot set down a kilometer from the compound, close enough to matter, but far enough to avoid becoming a target for whoever had turned this extraction into a shooting gallery. "Ghost moving to support Team Bravo. ETA 4 minutes. Copy that, Ghost. We're down to 11 effectives and running low on ammunition. Whatever you're planning, make it fast." Thomas moved through terrain with speed that sacrificed stealth for urgency, trusting that the ongoing firefight would mask his approach from hostiles focused on the SEALs pinned inside the compound. He reached the perimeter and assessed the tactical situation with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a career turning bad situations into survivable ones. The hostiles had positioned themselves to create crossfire that prevented the SEALs from reaching their planned extraction point. Superior numbers and defensive positions were slowly grinding down the operators despite their better training and equipment. Thomas flanked wide to the east, circling behind the hostile positions until he could engage from an angle that wouldn't risk friendly fire. He opened up with controlled bursts from the rifle he had acquired from the operations center, dropping 3 hostiles before they realized they were taking fire from an unexpected vector. The confusion his attack created gave the SEALs the opening they needed. Shaw's team burst from the compound carrying a stretcher with David Clark strapped to it, his body alarmingly thin and clearly injured from the extraction that had gone catastrophically wrong. Ghost, covering fire on the northwest corner. Thomas shifted position, laying down suppressive fire that forced the remaining hostiles to seek cover instead of maintaining their shooting positions. The SEALs reached the extraction point where helicopters were already inbound rotors, creating dust clouds that reduced visibility to nearly zero. An RPG streaked out of the chaos, missing the lead helicopter by meters, but close enough that the pilot had to take evasive action that disrupted the landing pattern. Thomas tracked the RPG's origin point and put 3 rounds into the hostile, preparing to reload, dropping him before a second shot could launch. The SEALs loaded David onto the first helicopter while providing covering fire for each other with the disciplined coordination of professionals who had trained for exactly these contingencies. Thomas sprinted toward the second helicopter, covering distance, while incoming fire kicked up dirt in patterns that suggested his luck was running out through simple mathematics. He felt the impact before he heard the shot, a sledgehammer blow to his left leg that sent him stumbling. Training took over, converting the fall into a controlled roll that brought him back to his feet despite the leg refusing to bear weight properly. He limped the final 20 meters to the helicopter while Shaw laid down covering fire from the door gun. Hands pulled Thomas aboard as the helicopter lifted, leaving the kill zone behind with speed that made the ground fall away in dizzying acceleration. A medic was already cutting away his pant leg to assess the damage, revealing a through-and-through wound that had missed major arteries but shredded muscle tissue. You're lucky it wasn't 6 inches higher or you'd be bleeding out. Thomas ignored the pain screaming up from his leg to focus on the stretcher across from him where David Clark lay surrounded by medics working to stabilize injuries that extended beyond whatever wound he had sustained during extraction. 3 years of captivity had reduced him to a skeletal framework wrapped in skin that showed evidence of prolonged malnutrition and systematic abuse. David's eyes flickered open, struggling to focus through whatever pain medications the medics had administered. Who are you?" Thomas leaned forward despite the medic's objections about keeping still. "Captain, I'm Ghost. I'm here to bring you home." Recognition filtered slowly through David's consciousness, memory surfacing from 3 years ago when they had stood together in an Afghan valley making impossible decisions under fire. You came back. I never really left, sir. Just took me too long to find you." David's hand reached out weakly and Thomas gripped it with his own despite the medic's continued protests. "Amanda, my sister? She never stopped looking, never gave up. She's the reason we found you." David's eyes closed again, consciousness slipping away, but not before something that might have been a smile flickered across his ravaged features. The helicopter banked hard, heading for German airspace, where Ramstein Air Base waited with surgical facilities that could stabilize David enough for transport stateside. Thomas allowed the medic to work on his leg while watching David's chest rise and fall with the shallow breaths of someone clinging to life through determination and luck. Shaw dropped into the seat beside Thomas once they had reached cruising altitude and relative safety. "That was the craziest thing I've seen in 15 years of operations. You just inserted yourself into an active combat zone with zero backup and no authorization. Seemed like the right call at the time. You saved our asses. Hernandez and Park made it out alive because you drew fire when we needed it most. I'm putting you in for a commendation whether you want one or not. Just make sure David gets the care he needs. Everything else is paperwork." Ramstein appeared through the helicopter's windows like salvation rendered in concrete and steel. The medical team waited on the tarmac with equipment that belonged in operating rooms rather than field hospitals, ready to receive casualties that the mission had generated despite everyone's best efforts. They rushed David into surgery while another team worked on Thomas's leg, cleaning and suturing the wound with efficiency that suggested this was far from their first gunshot injury. The pain came in waves now that adrenaline was fading, each surge reminding him that 50-year-old bodies recovered slower than their 25-year-old equivalents. A nurse brought him a phone after the surgeons had finished their work. "Someone named Amanda has been calling every 20 minutes for the past 3 hours. The operations center finally gave her this number." Thomas took the phone with hands that had started shaking from delayed shock. "Amanda." "Thomas. They said there were casualties, that the mission went wrong. Is David alive?" Are you alive? We're both alive. David's in surgery now. They're saying he lost a lot of blood during extraction, took shrapnel to his left leg when an RPG hit close to his position. The next 48 hours are critical, and you— The nurse said she was treating your injuries. Thomas looked down at the leg wrapped in enough bandages to immobilize it completely. Through and through to my leg. I'll be walking with a cane for a few weeks, but nothing permanent. I'm fine. You weren't supposed to be anywhere near the combat zone. You promised you'd stay safe. Plans changed when the team got pinned down. I couldn't watch good men die because I was too scared to help when I had the skills and experience to make a difference. Silence stretched across the connection, broken only by Amanda's breathing becoming unsteady. You saved him. After 3 years after everyone told me to give up hope, you actually saved my brother. We saved him. You're the one who never stopped searching, who forced the government to act, who gave David a reason to survive long enough for rescue to reach him. I just helped with the last part. Thomas, I need you to come home. You and David both. Emily needs her father, and I need to see you. The admission carried weight beyond its simple words, acknowledging feelings that had been building for months but never articulated directly. 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if David needs extra stabilization before transport. But we're coming home, Amanda. Both of us. The surgeons emerged 6 hours later with news that balanced hope against continued danger. David had survived the operation, but infection and organ stress from prolonged captivity meant the next 3 days would determine whether his body could sustain recovery or would collapse despite their best efforts. Thomas spent those 72 hours alternating between his hospital bed and the chair beside David's watching monitors that tracked vital signs with the obsessive focus of someone who had already lost too many people to medical complications following successful extractions. Emily called twice daily with updates about school and Sharon's cooking and plans for when Daddy came home, her voice providing anchors to normalcy that kept Thomas grounded when anxiety threatened to overwhelm careful optimism. On the 4th day, David's fever broke. His eyes opened with clarity that had been absent during brief moments of consciousness over the previous week. He looked around the room until his gaze landed on Thomas sitting in the corner with his injured leg elevated. Ghost. The single word came out rough from disuse and dehydration, but completely lucid. Welcome back, Captain. You gave us quite a scare there for a while. How long? 4 days since extraction. We're at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. You'll be stateside within the week once the doctors clear you for transport. David tried to sit up, managed perhaps 6 inches before exhaustion forced him back against pillows. My sister, is she? She's safe in Colorado, calling every few hours, demanding updates on your condition. She wants to fly here, but I convinced her to wait until you're stable enough for visitors who aren't medical personnel. Relief washed across David's features with enough force that the heart rate monitor registered the emotional spike. Tell her I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving, for making her search for the pain I caused. You can tell her yourself soon enough. She's going to want to hear your voice confirming you're alive and on your way home. The medical transport to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center launched 8 days after the extraction, carrying David, along with 2 other wounded operators who had sustained injuries during the mission. Thomas flew commercial despite offers to join the military transport, his leg healing well enough that he could navigate airports with a cane and enough pain medication to make the journey tolerable. Amanda and Emily met him at Denver International. Emily spotted him first despite the crowd, her excited shout cutting through the terminal noise. Daddy. She ran with the confidence of someone who knew her father would always catch her, launching herself into his arms, despite the cane that suggested physical limitations. Thomas held her with strength that had nothing to do with muscles, and everything to do with love that made injuries irrelevant when they stood between him and his daughter. Amanda approached more slowly, her eyes cataloging the cane and the way Thomas favored his right leg and the exhaustion that weeks of stress had carved into his features. She stopped just close enough to speak without shouting. You kept your promise. You came back. Always the word quiet, but absolute. David is at Walter Reed. They're saying 6 months of physical therapy, maybe longer depending on how his body responds, but he's alive and getting stronger every day. I'm flying to D.C. tomorrow. I need to see him with my own eyes, need to hear his voice, need to know this is actually real and not some dream I'll wake up from. He'd like that. Kept asking about you every time he was conscious enough to form complete thoughts. Emily tugged on Thomas's sleeve, demanding attention. Can we go home now? I want to show you the treehouse plans I made while you were gone. Treehouse plans. When did that become a project? Miss Amanda said we should build one together when you got back. She found instructions online and everything. Thomas looked at Amanda, who had the grace to appear slightly embarrassed. I might have gotten carried away trying to distract her while you were gone. If you hate the idea, we can forget it. No, it's perfect. We'll start on it this weekend. The drive back to Hollow Creek took them through mountains painted in autumn colors that made Colorado look like something from a postcard designed to convince people that beauty still existed despite everything the world tried to destroy. Emily chattered constantly from the back seat, filling silence with stories about school and Sharon and the drawings she had made that were waiting at home. Amanda drove while Thomas rested his leg, grateful for the excuse to watch landscape pass without needing to navigate. What happens now? When David is stable, when Emily goes back to normal routines, when life stops being crisis management, Thomas considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I don't know. For 3 years I've been ghost pretending to be a mechanic. Then I was a mechanic pretending I could stay hidden forever. Now I'm somewhere in between, trying to figure out which parts of both identities are worth keeping and which ones need to die so something new can grow. That's not really an answer. No, it's not. But it's honest, which seems more important than pretending I have everything figured out. Amanda pulled into the garage parking lot where Martinez Auto Repair's sign still hung above the bay door, faded but familiar. Emily unbuckled and ran inside to gather her treehouse plans while Thomas and Amanda remained in the car. I meant what I said at the airport. About needing you. Emily and I both. Not as Ghost the operator or Thomas the mechanic, but as whoever you're becoming when you're not trying to be either one. That person might not be who you think. Might have too much damage and too many ghosts to be good for anyone long term. Amanda reached across the console to take his hand. I spent 2 years chasing ghosts of my own. I understand that healing doesn't follow timelines or arrive when we demand it. Whatever you need, whatever time it takes, I'm willing to wait while you figure it out. The words hung between them with weight that felt simultaneously terrifying and hopeful, acknowledging futures that neither had planned, but both might want, if given permission to imagine possibilities. Emily burst back through the door, carrying rolled papers that presumably contained architectural dreams for treehouses, her excitement providing natural interruption before either adult had to commit to responses that would change everything. Daddy, look. We can build it in the big oak behind the garage, and it'll have windows and a rope ladder and a secret compartment for important things. Thomas studied the plans with appropriate solemnity, recognizing Amanda's careful drafting underneath Emily's enthusiastic annotations. This is excellent work. We'll need supplies, though. Maybe Miss Amanda wants to help us pick out lumber this weekend. Amanda nodded, accepting the invitation to stay integrated in their lives beyond the crisis that had brought them together. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. 3 months later, Walter Reed discharged David Clark to outpatient care with restrictions that would govern his life for at least another year. Physical therapy, 5 days per week, regular psychological counseling, dietary restrictions and limitations on physical activity that made someone who had been a warrior feel trapped in a body that refused to obey commands. Amanda brought him home to their mother's house in Connecticut, where Patricia Clark cried for an hour straight while holding her son and refusing to release him, even when doctors suggested she needed to let him rest. The reunion carried weight that 3 years of grief had accumulated every moment, feeling both impossible and insufficient to compensate for time stolen by war and politics. David recovered enough strength over those months to attend functions and make statements and receive commendations from military officials who wanted credit for rescuing someone they had initially abandoned. He smiled for cameras and said the right things and allowed himself to be transformed into symbol rather than person, because that seemed to be what healing required from victims of international incidents. But at night, when cameras stopped clicking and officials went home to families who had never known captivity, David would call Thomas and talk for hours about nothing important. The weather in Connecticut versus Colorado, Emily's progress on reading chapter books. The treehouse that had required 3 weekends to build, but now stood as testament to what persistence could accomplish with proper planning. You did good, Ghost. Saving me building that life in Hollow Creek, showing Amanda that hope wasn't foolish even when everyone else gave up. I just did what needed doing. You would have done the same. Maybe. But you actually did it, which counts for more than hypothetical intentions. 6 months after the extraction, Amanda made her decision official through paperwork that transformed intentions into legally binding commitments. Clark Defense Systems opened its Western Division in Colorado Springs, with Amanda permanently relocating to manage operations that employed 50 people and focused on drone technology that her father would have appreciated for its innovation. She bought a house in Hollow Creek close enough to the garage that Emily could walk there after school, but far enough to maintain appropriate boundaries, while relationships evolved at their own pace. The board accepted her decision with resignation rather than enthusiasm, but quarterly profits remained strong enough that objections carried no weight beyond personal inconvenience. Thomas and Amanda fell into rhythms that felt organic rather than forced. Dinners 3 or 4 nights per week, sometimes at her house and sometimes at his. Weekends helping Emily with homework or exploring hiking trails that wound through mountains, becoming familiar rather than exotic. Conversations that ranged from automotive repair to corporate strategy to philosophical questions about whether people could actually change or just learn to hide damage more effectively. On a December evening, with snow falling softly outside and Emily asleep upstairs after decorating cookies with enough frosting to constitute dinner, Thomas and Amanda sat on the couch watching fire burn down to coals, while silence stretched comfortable rather than awkward. David called this afternoon. Says he's accepted a position with Clark Defense as Director of Veteran Relations. Wants to help other soldiers transition from military service to civilian life with support systems that actually work, instead of bureaucratic mazes that lose people in paperwork. That's good. He'll be excellent at it once he's ready. He also said I should stop being an idiot and tell you how I actually feel instead of dancing around it like a teenager afraid of rejection. Thomas turned to face her directly, his expression carrying the kind of seriousness that made Amanda's heart rate accelerate. David always was smarter than me about relationships. I spent 3 years convincing myself that love died with Laura, and the best I could hope for was not making Emily's life worse through my continued existence. Then you showed up looking for ghosts and somehow made living feel possible again instead of just surviving. Amanda's eyes reflected firelight, and something that looked like tears held carefully in check. When I started searching for David, I thought I was looking for my brother, but I was also looking for proof that fighting for what matters isn't just romantic foolishness that reality crushes. You gave me that proof. You taught me that hope isn't weakness when it's backed by determination and willingness to risk everything for people who matter. So what happens now? We keep dancing around each other until Emily goes to college. Amanda moved closer, closing distance until no space remained between them. Or we stop dancing and acknowledge that what we've built over the past year matters more than fear of potential complications. Thomas kissed her, then gentle and tentative, like someone testing whether reality matched imagination. Amanda kissed back with certainty that left no room for doubt about intentions or feelings that had accumulated slowly but arrived with force that made denial impossible. They broke apart eventually, foreheads touching while breathing returned to normal patterns. Emily is going to be unbearable when she finds out. She's been planning this for months. She drew us into her family pictures before we'd even admitted we were building something worth naming. Smart kid. Gets it from her mother, Thomas's voice soft with memory that carried grief and gratitude in equal measure. Laura would have liked you. Would have appreciated how you made me remember that living isn't the same as just surviving. David flew to Colorado for Christmas, well enough to travel, but still walking with a cane that matched the one Thomas had abandoned 2 months earlier when his leg finally healed completely. Patricia Clark came as well. Her first trip west in a decade, nervous about mountains and small towns, but determined to meet the people who had brought her son home. The gathering filled Thomas's house with noise and warmth, and the kind of chaos that holidays generated when families assembled across generations and geographies. Emily appointed herself tour guide, showing Uncle David her treehouse and her room, and every drawing she had made over the past year that documented life as it transformed from tragedy into something approaching hope. Patricia pulled Amanda aside while Thomas and David worked on dinner preparations that involved more storytelling than actual cooking. "You found him. After everyone told you to give up, after your own mother begged you to stop torturing yourself with false hope, you actually found him and brought him home." Amanda felt tears threatening despite her best efforts at maintaining composure. "I couldn't have done it without Thomas, without his contacts and skills and willingness to risk everything for someone he thought he'd failed." Patricia smiled with the wisdom of someone who had survived decades of loss and learned that gratitude mattered more than keeping score of who contributed what. "You found each other. Sometimes that's how healing works. We search for one thing and discover we needed something entirely different." Dinner that night felt like celebration rather than mere meal. David told stories about Walter Reed that made everyone laugh despite the pain that threaded through recovery. Emily demonstrated her improved reading skills by performing dramatic interpretations of her favorite chapter book that involved voices and gestures that made even Patricia laugh until tears ran. After Emily went to bed and Patricia retired to the guest room, the four adults sat around the fireplace with whiskey that Thomas had been saving for occasions worth commemorating. To second chances, David raised his glass in toast. "To people stubborn enough to fight for them, even when the odds suggest quitting makes more sense." They drank while snow fell outside, covering Hollow Creek in white that transformed the town into something from a Christmas card too perfect to exist outside imagination. David studied Thomas across the fireplace, his expression serious despite the whiskey and the holiday atmosphere. "I never blamed you, Ghost, for following my order, for saving the journalist, for doing your job exactly as trained. I need you to understand that." "I know," Amanda told me. "But knowing and believing are different things when you've carried guilt for 3 years. Then let me say it directly so there's no room for doubt. You did everything right. You followed orders from a superior officer in a situation where split-second decisions meant the difference between saving some people or losing everyone. What happened to me after that wasn't your fault or your failure. It was war being what war has always been, chaos that destroys good people regardless of anyone's best intentions." Thomas nodded, throat too tight for immediate response. Amanda reached over to take his hand, her grip providing anchor when words failed. "Besides," David continued, "if you'd made different choices that night, we wouldn't be sitting here now. Amanda wouldn't have spent 2 years searching. You wouldn't have come out of retirement to help plan the extraction. Emily wouldn't have the treehouse she's been showing me obsessive detail about for the past 3 hours. Sometimes the worst moments create pathways to futures we couldn't have imagined during the crisis." The fire burned down to embers while conversation drifted to easier topics. Plans for the new year, Emily's upcoming birthday, the Western Division's projects that Amanda described with enthusiasm that made corporate strategy sound almost exciting. Eventually, Patricia and David departed for the hotel where they were staying, leaving Thomas and Amanda alone in the quiet that followed gatherings. "That went well," Amanda's observation carrying relief. "Your mother didn't seem horrified that her daughter is dating a mechanic instead of pursuing appropriate Connecticut society matches. I think saving her son earned you permanent immunity from maternal judgment about appropriate life choices." Thomas pulled her close, grateful for warmth and presence and futures that felt possible rather than terrifying. "I love you." Probably should have said it before now, but the words kept getting stuck somewhere between thinking them and actually speaking them out loud. Amanda looked up at him with eyes that reflected firelight and certainty. "I love you too. Have for months maybe, since that first morning when you taught me to change oil and didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing things everyone from small towns learns by osmosis." They kissed while snow continued falling outside, covering the world in white that made tomorrow feel clean and full of possibilities that yesterday hadn't contained. Emily would wake up to a house full of people who loved her, to an uncle she'd never met, but immediately adopted, to a grandmother who brought stories from a world bigger than Hollow Creek, but no more important than the life they had built in this small town beneath the mountains. Thomas Martinez had spent 3 years running from Ghost, convinced that shedding one identity and adopting another would somehow make the past disappear. But healing didn't work through subtraction or denial. It worked through integration, through accepting that warriors could become mechanics without losing the skills that defined them, through understanding that loving again didn't diminish previous love but honored it by choosing life over mere survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and old ghosts that refused complete exorcism. But tonight, surrounded by family chosen and inherited, Thomas allowed himself to believe that second chances weren't just survival strategies, but genuine opportunities to become someone better than the person he had been before. Loss taught him that holding on mattered more than letting go.